Hey guys, my name is Ryan and welcome to Overwatch Central. Now, of course, yesterday we had a big patch that came out late last night. It had a number of changes on it, so we're going to go through them, show off a bit of gameplay of each of them. But there's a nice clever theme from Blizzard in these patch notes with all of these changes that I haven't really seen anybody else highlight. I think it's going to be really big for the game, and I'll explain why. Before we get started, I did want to shout out HyperX. We've been working with them for a good portion of time now. I did want to highlight the Alloy FPS RGB mechanical keyboard, but I'll do it towards the end of this video. We're going to go over the patch bit by bit, but if you do want to skip that, you can find a skip into the comments talking exactly why these changes are so clever from Blizzard. We'll start with talking about D.Va and the defense matrix. The regeneration rate has been increased from 12.5% to 16 per second. Showing you that on screen, you can see that it's a pretty hefty difference, at least it's noticeable, and also the delay before regeneration is lowered from 1 second to 0.5 seconds, meaning that it starts a lot quicker. So there's less of a delay before the regen starts for the defense matrix, and also it regens a lot faster. It still makes it quite a twitchy ability that you need to be pressing it at the right time, and it doesn't affect how long you're using it in one go, but a change like this should make it so you can constantly keep pressing the button, use it more often, and I think that this is a really healthy change, without being too overpowered. Next up is a reset. The protective barrier cooldown has been increased from 9 to 10 seconds. I feel like this is a test in the waters change for a reset, to be honest. It's not a hefty one. I'm quite surprised that they didn't hammer on a reset a little bit more. This nerf is kind of tame in comparison to what I was sort of expecting at this point. It's still a nerf, it still has a big impact on her, but an increase in 1 second when it comes to the shield might not be the big change, but when you compare that to all of the stuff that Sigma's had, it might make sense where Blizzard's head's at with these changes, and kind of sort of seeing where a reset is at the moment. But that pairs alongside a buff to Roadhog where he gets an extra bit of ammunition inside his scrap gun, meaning that overall his DPS has gone up. This makes Roadhog more of an option for shield break, which I think was necessary. No tanks really had that option. That's why people were saying that Bastion would make a good tank if they changed a few aspects around for him, because at the minute Orisa Sigma is so strong because they're double barrier, but there's not really any tank options that a team can run in order to counter that. Up until now with these changes at least. But now we go over to Sigma and he has a fair few changes. His kinetic grasp no longer blocks chain hook and whip shot, which makes Roadhog strong against him in another capacity. Graphitic flux, high gravity effect duration reduced from 1.2 seconds to 0.9. The experimental barrier, the regeneration rate has been decreased from 175 to 150 per second whilst it's down, but it also now has a 1 second cooldown after recalling the barrier. You're seeing how that looks on screen. It isn't as clunky as I thought it would be. I was really sort of scared that any change like this that Blizzard would put in would just make Sigma feel awful to play, but honestly I think that this is fine and it's a healthy change, but that in itself isn't too destructive of Sigma that he's no longer playable. He also has an initial 0.2 second cast time removed, so there's a little bit of a buff for him there, but overall these are all hefty nerfs for the character. But I don't think anything in this patch so far has been in the vein of destroying a hero completely. Here's a buff that I like. Winston's barrier projected duration has been increased from 6 to 9 seconds of the barrier, and the health has been increased from 600 to 700, meaning that there's more barriers that Winston can put down, which was one of his weakest areas. It doesn't necessarily make him stronger against those characters that he doesn't like, such as Reaper or Mei or even Doomfist to a certain extent, but again, a nice straightforward but not overpowered buff for Winston coming in order to maybe see him played more. Baptiste got nerfed. The immortality field's health was decreased to 200, which I think is fair enough, but I also think that immortality field as an ability is still very strong. It's not on a massive cooldown for what it is, so I like this change. I like most of the changes that are in here. Lucio got reverted, surprisingly enough, even after Blizzard said that it wasn't likely. The crossfade speed boost has been increased from 25% normally. Amp It Up has it increased from 50% to 60%, but the speed buff whilst wall riding has been reduced from 40% to 30%. Basically reverting to an extent of what Lucio used to be before Goats Comp was a thing. Now that Goats Comp cannot be played, it's nice to see that Lucio was reverted and having his speed increased to where it once was. Mercy's Valkyrie, the extra beams created by Valkyrie now ignores enemy barriers. This was an inconsistent thing. Like a lot of Mercy's kit, there's a lot of weird inconsistencies with how her abilities work, especially when it comes to enemy barriers. So this is not only a nice change for more consistency, but a nice way for us to know that now she can heal through enemy barriers. Moira got nerfed. Biotic Grasp, the self-healing has been reduced from 30 to 20 per second. Necessary because Moira's self-healing was pretty strong. I like her healing output and her survivability with Fade, but this on top of that was a bit too much. 20 health per second is still quite a lot though, so not like we're going to see her fall out of the meta anytime soon. Doomfist's Rocket Punch, time to reach max charge increased from 1 to 1.4 seconds. I'm not really a Doomfist player, but I certainly felt this change. This is one of the more clunky ones, and whilst it is a bit rough to use to begin with, no doubt people will get used to it over time. I just don't think Doomfist players are going to be very happy about it. Unlucky. The best defense, shield health gained per hit, is reduced from 35 to 30. Again, Doomfist had such a huge amount of survivability based off the shields that he was getting from his passive, so this just makes him a little bit more susceptible to damage coming in, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. Again, they didn't completely butcher Doomfist, even though he's really strong right now, but I think that these changes are fair. Sombra's Translocator, the cooldown has been increased from 4 to 6 seconds on using it, but cooldown now begins immediately upon deploying the beacon or if it's killed by an enemy. I think this is a sort of middle of the pack change, to be honest. I don't really think it's too much of a nerf to Sombra at all. Certainly not a buff, but we might need a bit more time with this to see how it is. I'm not a Sombra player, and it's not really sort of written out in front of us how much of a change this will be. We'll have to see what other Sombra players think and whether there's an impact there. Penultimately, we have Symmetra. Photon Barrier duration has been reduced from 15 to 12 seconds. And health has been reduced to 4,000, making the ultimate a lot less obnoxious, but it's still pretty obnoxious. The damage that the sentry turrets do as well has been reduced from 50 to 40, and the photon projector, which is her primary fire, should now be a lot louder if you're being hit by it, with a louder impact sound. And finally, Tracer, her damage fall-off has been increased to 13 meters, up from 10, meaning that her effective range is a little bit better, and she can fight from a little bit more of a distance. I really like this change. I don't think it's a huge one, but this could have more impact than people are giving it credit for. Now, I've done a few fair videos in the past saying, oh, I really like these changes for Blizzard, they're really clever. But for me, this is a lot different. I want to say that these changes, on the face of it, look really exciting, but I really don't think they're going to be that impactful. I don't think that the changes themselves are going to change too much about the game. Not all that much, at least. But how can they be clever changes but also have very little impact? It's just because of the way that it's put together. It's very clear to see what Blizzard are trying to do. They're trying to bring the impact of double barrier down, nerf them a little bit, but also buffing dive just enough that you see and feel an impact. These changes aren't going to put dive, in a place like it used to be, where it was meta for a full year, Genji Tracer going to be back in a big fashion. But these changes just have a little bit more quality of life for Winston and D.Va, that Blizzard have basically said to the community, hey, you can play these heroes now without feeling like you're throwing. This is something I spoke to Evil Toaster a little bit about in an interview like you heard before, but here's a clip that I wanted to include specifically because I feel like it relates to what this patch is. This was recorded before this patch, by the way.
Because no one wants to play tank, so if you do, or if you are telling your team what to play, you just want them to play what's easiest instead of having to coordinate with tanks that require more coordination. So the few tank players that do exist feel like they're coerced into playing Orisa Sigma, and then they don't swap because that's just all that they play, and then they don't want to play something different that'll make their team angry. So then the meta stays stale no matter what happens across the rest of the team comps in both teams. And this is something, dude.
Whilst it comes as no surprise that double barrier is very strong, I don't think it's as strong as Goats was. I don't think it's a case where if you're not running it, you're effectively throwing in some capacity. But because this meta is so focused on tanks and so little people play tanks, there's a big focus that you have to have Orisa and you have to have Sigma, when you realistically don't. Whilst they're strong, I don't think you need to play them all the time. People compared Orisa to Mercy in the Moth meta, where you kinda had to play Mercy. A lot of people didn't necessarily want to, but you felt that you had to, otherwise you were throwing. That was very much the case back then. I don't necessarily think it's as bad for Orisa, but you have that going on with both the tanks in the team, Orisa and Sigma. That if you ran Orisa Zarya or Orisa Roadhog, Orisa D.Va, and then Sigma Zarya as an example, it's not Orisa Sigma, it's throwing. Tanks stop doing that, you're ruining the game. And then tanks don't want to play tanks anymore, and the whole situation means that DPS plays of 20-minute queue times, nobody's having fun. That general sense of you have to play Orisa Sigma is so deep set into the community that it's affecting everything. All of the roles due to queue times with role lock, so on and so forth, you get the idea. Evil Toaster said, and I agree, that if people started playing whatever tanks they wanted to, if they want to play Winston or D.Va, then they should. This meta feels like it's more of a mindset at the moment. The people feel that you have to play Orisa Sigma all of the time. But if people started playing more Winston D.Va, more Zarya Reinhardt, all of the other tanks in all of the other compositions, they'd start to see that Orisa Sigma isn't all that. It isn't the be-all, end-all composition that just completely ruins everything. You can play these other options. And that's why I really like this patch, because it is effectively Blizzard saying that, whilst also giving us a bit of an incentive by giving us these changes that add quality of life to Winston and D.Va, making them a lot stronger, whilst also nerfing Orisa and Sigma in a way that doesn't completely crush them. I like this change from Blizzard because, simply put, it's them saying you can play Winston and D.Va a lot more now. The changes that they've added, you can feel the impact, but they're not making these heroes so powerful that there's a huge power creep going on. When this patch comes out, a lot more people are going to play Winston and D.Va because I think they want to at this point, and these changes give them a bit more of a reason to do that. If you picked up Winston in competitive now, people will be like, dude, what are you doing? But after these buffs and changes, people aren't really going to question you as much. In fact, I think people will be like, oh yeah, Winston got buffed, let's play dive, let's do this. And it's more of a desire of wanting to play that comp as opposed to playing a comp that's really strong. I think as time has gone on, the meta has been more deep set into the community to a point where it's like, this is the only option, this is the only thing that we can play. Especially with rollout being added in, that seems to be much more of an issue than before. And this just gives tank players more freedom. It gives them the chance to play more dive, and this might incentivize people to start playing tanks more, to reduce the queues, and get people out of that mindset that people have been playing in Season 18, and it's been awful, to a point where I've just tried to avoid it as much as possible, where you have to play Orisa or Sigma, otherwise you are a bad tank player, you're throwing, and we hate you. Not strictly the case. I really do not think that that's the case at all. And with more Winston and D.Va, we'd see less Reaper, less Mei, maybe less Doomfist after these nerfs too, maybe seeing a bit more Tracer after the buffs, a bit more Genji, with a making Hanzo might up it up a little bit. We should be in a more map dependent meta, especially in those areas like Watchpoint Gibraltar where Winston and D.Va were still decently strong, but now there's definitely more reason to use them. So really good patch, I'm really happy with this. None of these changes are so impactful that it's going to break the game, at least from what we can tell so far. But most importantly, this is Blizzard saying to the community, we are giving you buffs to Winston and D.Va, play them more, play Orisa Sigma less. Having options is really important to Blizzard, but speaking of options, do definitely check out the variety of different keyboards that you can get from HyperX, who we have been working with for over 2 years now at this point. I was pretty proud of that segue into it. We've been highlighting the Alloy FPS RGB mechanical keyboards. It's the ones that myself and Miska use, and as you can hear, they're not too loud for a mechanical keyboard. They're not annoying in that fashion at all, but they still feel very responsive, and they also look beautiful. You can check them out in the comments and description below. But that's it for this time. But let me know what you think in the comments below, whether you like the patch, whether any of these changes stand out to you. Take care, and see you soon.